So this evening, I'm going to be talking about the E word and developing Bahamian-specific conservation plans. All right, so I'm going to go over 4 specific discussion points. The first is looking at that the anthropologic component of conservation is not adequately addressed in Bahamian conservation planning. The second is that conservation education needs to be Bahamian-specific and outcome-driven. The third is that behavioral change is a critical component of conservation. And the fourth is that the implementation, management, and compliance necessary to meet conservation targets will depend heavily on citizen engagement and self-regulation. So before I get any further, I want to go over 2 specific concepts and make sure we all know what I'm talking about. So the first thing is conservation. And yes, it's a yin-yang symbol, but I figured it symbolizes how there's the biological aspect of conservation and there's also the anthropological aspect. So humans depend on the environment and biodiversity supports the ecosystem services that we need. And I'm not going to be talking about today, which is the academic pursuit of science for extending knowledge, and for the love of knowledge, or specifically environmental education. So these are 2 specific topics that are closely related, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about conservation. So the anthropological component of conservation is not adequately addressed in Bahamian conservation planning. All right, and so this is what our conservation planning imbalance really looks like. And if I want you to think about, especially those of you who are involved in conservation work, we put so much effort into I see heads nodding, so people understand what I'm saying. All right, so we put so much effort into understanding the biology of the species that we're working with, understanding the ecosystems that we're working with. And then the humans, it's like, nah, we'll figure it out. Okay, and so I want you to really think about this. If we want to put a closed season on a species, you're going to make sure that you know everything there is to know about that species, exactly when it reproduces, so that you can ensure that your conservation methods are effective. You're not just going to flip through the calendar and be like, you know what, my birthday's in June, and July's really fun, so why not? Let's make that the closed season. We don't do that when it comes to implementing the biological aspect of conservation. So why do we do that when it comes to the human aspect when it's equal? These are 2 parts of the same puzzle. All right, and so I want to be very clear that conservation is a game, and there really is only one outcome for us. We have to win. If we don't win, everything dies. We lose our species, we lose our ecosystems, humans will not be. If we're able to survive, it'll be really bleak. All right, so we really have no option but to win this game, but this game is complex. So what we need to create is an equal balance between the biological and the anthropological aspects of conservation. Conservation education needs to be Bahamian-specific and outcome-driven. Okay, so, like I mentioned before, we can't continue to play this lucky education game, where we're going to say, oh, well, we're just going to do this PSA and we're just going to talk to children and then we'll count, we'll do a pre and post test and see what the results are. And wonderful, 98% of the children can tell you what the close season is. Success. That doesn't work. Just because you have 98% of people who can tell you when the close season is, does not mean that those 98% of the people are going to abide by the laws of the closed season. All right, let's not get it twisted. So behavioral change is a critical component to conservation. All right, so I want to be very clear about this. Conservation demands behavioral change. We're not talking about content retention. If you're focusing on environmental education, education for education's sake, then it's completely okay for you to do an evaluation and to understand how much people are learning. But if you're talking about changing behavior, content retention is not good enough. Prime example, all of us in this room know that 1, our dump is on fire, and that 2, plastic and single-use plastics are bad for the environment. But How many of you used a plastic cup or a coffee cup or a plate during this environmental conference? Okay? So we are people who are the ones creating these PSAs, but yet we struggle at abiding by the laws that we are preaching, because behavioral change is difficult. All right, so this is where I'm saying awareness and environmental education alone does not equate to behavioral change. Developing sustainable behavior requires knowledge. It requires an emotional connection. You have to care about whatever it is that you're trying to change. And then you also have to believe that you have an internal locus of control so that your actions will make a difference. If you do not feel like your actions are going to make a difference, why are you going to bother? Because it doesn't matter. And this becomes extremely complex because people have different needs. What's going to inspire me to change my actions may not be the same thing for you. So when we're talking about conservation, we have to understand the people. If you don't understand the people, you won't reach them. So our country is working on some amazing targets. We've got the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals that we're working towards, specifically Goal 13, which is to take urgent action to combat climate change, Goal 14, which is to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources, and then Goal 15, which is to sustainably manage forests, combat degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. See, Ethan, we got plants in there too, even though I'm a marine lover. And then we have the 2020 Caribbean Challenge, which is to protect 20% of our Bahamian marine and coastal environment and effectively manage 50% of that. Now, in order for us to do this, we need to understand the people that we're working with, because all of us in the room alone, no matter how brilliant we are, we're not going to be able to achieve that. We need to have citizen engagement. And the thing is, in order for us to engage citizens, we need to understand the country that we're living in. We currently live in a country where there are 43,000 Bahamians who live under the poverty line, which currently exists at $4,247 a day. If you live in this country, you know you can barely live on $12,000 a year. The number of households surviving under $5,000 a year increased by 83% between 2007 and 2011. Young people have a 50% rate of long-term unemployment. 66% of Bahamian employers say that the lack of specific skills is the most important barrier to recruitment. But we shouldn't be surprised by this when 80% of our Bahamians attend public schools and 50% of public school students don't graduate. 50% of public school Bahamian students don't graduate. When 72% of our population is under the age of 49. And in 2017, for those who are not Bahamian, that's our next election, there will be 113,000 eligible voters between the ages of 18 and 35. So maybe those of us in this room aren't in crisis, but there are many Bahamians who are. And when we are talking about conservation, we have to understand the human component of that conservation situation. So, as we go forward to develop our conservation plans to achieve the 2020 and 2030 goals, we have to take a strategic approach to conservation that takes into consideration both the human and the environmental component. Successful achievement of these goals will require the best science available. In addition, the implementation, management, and compliance necessary to meet these targets will depend heavily on citizen engagement and self-regulation. Let's be real, the Bahamas National Trust is doing everything within their power, and our government works really hard, but there's no way that we're going to be able to have people enforcing all the parks that we're creating. It's not possible. We need people to support that, and that's the citizens. So I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Young Marine Explorers, and what we do is we prepare youth to address the social, environmental, and economic challenges that face the Bahamas by using the ocean as a medium. And we work specifically with youth from underserved communities. Our programs have been designed specifically to address the challenges that exist within the human population, so that the Bahamian people are in a position then to deal with our biological aspect of conservation. So we have two key programs that we work on. The first is our high school program. It's a 3-year program that has a Year of the Ocean, Year of Biodiversity, and Year of Sustainability. We have a 26-week curriculum where we meet with the students for 7 hours a week, 2 hours after school and 5 hours on Saturday. Our curriculum has been mapped on top of the Ministry of Education curriculum for geography, math, biology, and language arts. So what this means, we're trying to address the education crisis by when we are in the mangroves exploring, we are reinforcing concepts that students need to know so that they can excel in the classroom. Additionally, we have a huge confidence crisis in this country. So we are helping our students develop leadership skills, develop their citizenship skills, so that they will become these agents of change, which we need. Additionally, we have an internship program. You might have seen Tavano, he's been helping out. We have a 2-year internship program. This 2-year internship program takes successful graduates from our high school program, enrolls them in a distance learning associate degree program at Miami-Dade College, and then it engages them, so through us, they help us run our after-school programs, but then also, when the opportunity arises, they go on various research projects. And the idea is that we are building the capacity so that these people will then be able to work in the parks. You know, we have 2 YME alumni who are now the education officers at the Bahamas National Trust. But if we don't create the capacity, we won't have people to help us fulfill and achieve these goals. So, where does YME fall in the Bahamian conservation world? YME programs are preparing youth to address the imminent socioeconomic and environmental implications that climate change and environmental degradation pose to the Bahamas. We are developing a cohort of youth who will become the citizens capable of working in and managing parks, participating in long-term monitoring programs, self-regulating their behavior, encouraging sustainable behavior development amongst their peers, and becoming an active voice for conservation in the Bahamas. So my take-home messages for you today is to please understand we are in a game called conservation, and we are only able to win. That has to be our outcome. But if we are going to win, you cannot forget that the human aspect in your conservation plan. Conservation is outcome-driven. All right, we have to focus on the outcome and not the output. The fourth take-home message is that behavioral change is a critical component of conservation. And the best thing that I can help, for you guys to think about that is I have to, myself, I'm up here preaching about it, but I myself have to create checks and balances. So with our interns, we have this situation in our office that if they see me with a plastic bottle, which rarely ever happens, or a coffee cup from Starbucks, I have to pay them $1. Usually it will happen with Starbucks because I sometimes really need my coffee. But that means my already expensive $7 cup of coffee is now $10. Okay, and I'm realizing when I was writing this, I realized that maybe I need to up it because sometimes I will still pay them the $3 because I've got 3 interns, so that means I'm spending $10 on a cup of coffee. But we, as the people who are preaching this message, we have to come up with ways so that we are not hypocrites. Because if we can't get our act together, how do we expect the mother living over the hill with 6 children in crisis mode to care about what we're talking about? It's not going to happen. Additionally, when we are talking about developing our conservation plans in this country, remember the implementation, management, and compliance necessary to meet these conservation targets will depend heavily on citizen engagement and self-regulation. And so what my ideal situation is that if you're trying to put in a protected area in Cat Island, talk to me, because then we can develop a Young Marine Explorers program in Cat Island. So we can be simultaneously developing the capacity that you will need to manage that park. All right, but as agencies and organizations working towards a common goal of conservation in the Bahamas, we have to work together. And so with that said, I would like to say thank you to, most important, all my YME interns, Tavanos, Laurent and Cyril, of course my YME members and alumni who are working so hard at the conference, Alexio and Stefan, and then of course to Dr. Kathleen Sullivan-Seeley and Dr. Suzanne Banis, who've been working closely with me from the University of Miami, and then of course the Ministry of Youth and the Zoological Society of London who supported my work over the past years. Thank you.